Can everyone hear me? Hopefully that fixed it. Sorry about the delay, everyone. Thanks for your patience. We are here to talk about Tiddlywiki, a personal notebook, non-linear framework for collecting data of various kinds. I'm currently on the homepage for Tiddlywiki, which is Tiddlywiki, what is their site actually? Yeah, tiddlywiki.com. And here you can find a very comprehensive series of, well, the documentation is here, but they also have links to other projects which use the framework. What got me excited about this framework, and shout out to my friend Wakest, who on the Fediverse told me about it because we were looking to build a wiki for a project I'm involved with called Spirit Bomb. That's a virtual artist record label, and we wanted to build a wiki for all of those virtual characters. I have it pulled up here. I believe this is the Spirit Bomb wiki made in Tiddlywiki, and it's fully editable, as is the case with this framework. That is, we can disable that if we don't want users to open up each of these entries and view the contents, but I was really interested in its potential, and after I built this wiki for Spirit Bomb, I decided to give it a go with a personal site and compile a lot of my music activity, and then it from there just grew out more and more to expand to, I built a bookcase where I tracked everything that I was reading at the time and various things I've written for publications, and it became a repository of all kinds of work that I've done. And as a musician, things that I've read often inform my musical practice, so this presented a lot of interesting opportunities to create backlinks and connect various types of work together, which is, I think, the strength of the framework. One last thing I want to mention about it is that it's future-proof. If we go here and look up future-proof in the Tiddlywiki site itself, we can see that they had this in mind when building it. And I'm sure many of you have tried building sites of your own, and over the years you have to eventually perform updates, maybe change the entire framework, and do lots of different things to make sure that it's working, because the web is always evolving so fast. But with Tiddlywiki, I was impressed by this concept of future-proofing, and yes, what they're saying here is that if you start using the framework at the beginning of your career, you can be confident that it will carry you through to retirement, which is quite a bold claim, but I was like, all right, let's go, let's see. And I think if I had encountered this 10 years ago, you know, I wish I did, because all of the reading notes that I've been doing and all the different types of work that I've been cataloging and trying to collect documentation, I think this is a perfect framework for doing so. So let's get started. I don't want to bore you any longer with this introduction. On the site, we have this button called Download Empty, and it's a little bit unclear the way that it's worded, but we do want to download this. I'm going to download it to the desktop. I already had something called empty.html, so I'll just replace it. And that's it. You've downloaded the wiki framework. It's all self-encapsulated in a single HTML file, so that's part of what lends it to being future-proof. There's no relational database that it refers to. Everything is self-contained. It's an interesting program in that it's also a quine, which in programming terminology is a program that takes no input and references its own source code as the output. So everything within the framework is itself a tiddler, or one of these pages that we can see. I'm closing all these pages. These are tiddlers. These are like entries or posts. You can think of them as posts. So what I'm going to do is open the empty file we just downloaded. And here we are. We've loaded it locally on our desktop, in my case. So for today, there's no real prerequisites for HTML or CSS. You don't necessarily have to know anything like that. And you don't have to really know too much about Tiddlywiki itself. All we're going to do is get started using it, inputting data, and seeing how the data can be manipulated using things like filter runs and tags and that kind of thing. So for today, I'm just going to call this my notebook. This is the title of our site. You can see the title updated immediately over here. And this is for Babycastles. Oops. And we can just leave this alone for right now. Great. So I will close this, and now we have an empty notebook here. And so what I've designed today's workshop as a walkthrough to teach you all sort of what I learned when I was making my own site. There were a couple hurdles that I encountered that seemed pretty basic, but yes, I see that in the chat there is a lesson plan that contains some links. So if you want to follow along, I've provided some links that we can use as a basis for this workshop. And one last thing I should mention is that you might be wondering, well, how does all of this data get saved into the notebook? And it's this red check mark. This is our save button. And we make changes to the notebook by saving our changes. And right now we can just overwrite the empty file that we created and replace it. And that will save changes. But a good practice would be to have various copies of this HTML file because things can go wrong. They're very adamant about having multiple redundant backups on the Tiddlywiki page because you might be doing something in the browser might freeze and you have to force quit, and none of us like losing work, so it's a good practice to save often and to have multiple copies of everything. So the first thing I want to do is build a table of contents. And so what we'll do is we'll create a new Tiddler, and we want to name it Table of Contents. And as you can see, the case is sort of important here with the capitalization. Each word is capitalized. I'm not exactly sure why it needs to be this way, but this is something internal to the framework core, that it wants it to be named Table of Contents in this way. Let's give it a tag. In this case, we need to use a core framework tag called tags, and then sidebar, capital S, capital B. So that's $, $tags/sidebar. You can't use table of contents in this case. It must be this form of camel case, yes. I tried to do the other way. I tried to use your table of contents, or I even tried a different name, and it wouldn't work. And I don't have a good explanation as to why that is, but this, I know it doesn't look super pretty, but I don't think it will affect, in the grand scheme of things and in the power of what this framework can do, I wouldn't be too concerned about that right now. And there might be a way to change it. I just don't know what the answer to that is at this time. And then we have, if you're looking at the lesson notes, there's a little bit of code we're going to put into the body. So it's div class tc-table-of-contents, and then we have this macro TOC selective expandable, and then the name of our Tiddler table of contents. And that's it. Now this added a table of contents tab over here in our sidebar. We want to do a few more things to it to make it look better and to give it a custom name. So I'm going to edit our table of contents that we just created. In the type, I want to make sure that this is Tiddlywiki 5. And then we're going to add a few fields. And this is something that you'll become familiar with quite soon as you build out your notebook, is the power and the usefulness of creating custom fields. There's a bunch of ones that are there by default, but we can create any field that we want and title it anything that we want. Our first field we want to make is caption, and then we have another bit of code that we want to put in here. Oops. For caption, we want double curly brace. I don't know how easy this is to read. This might be helpful. So, this is the code we want for caption. It's a double curly brace $, language sidebar contents caption. Great. Let's add, let me see here. Let's add another field. The second one we want is list. The field value. We're going to create an about page. And then for this workshop, we'll create an image section, a section for text, and then something that I thought would be interesting is called recent discoveries. So that's double square bracket, and then recent space discoveries. Oops. Discoveries. And then close it with a double square bracket again. And then we'll click add. Oops, I have capitalized. The case is important here with these page names. If about had a lowercase a and we had an uppercase a here, it wouldn't refer to the same thing. Each Tiddler is case sensitive. One more field we want to add to our table of contents, which is list before. And it looks like I have a typo in the lesson plan notes. It should be before spelled correctly, with an E at the end. And the field name we want is, let me bring this back. I don't know why it defaults to that text size. Core UI sidebar with capital S, capital B, and then open. So we want to copy that and put that into the field value for list before. All right, so I think now we can save our table of contents by clicking this check. And you'll notice that our tab switched position, and now it's called contents instead of the default, which was, I think, table of contents. So we may be able to change that by, let's see if I make a custom name here and just say custom. for the caption. No, it doesn't like that. There's some limitations to the naming here, which I'm not too sure about. So right now I'm just keeping it as contents. That was working for me. That's clear enough for my use case, because I want the table of contents to appear here first, and then just list our contents. Okay, so now let's get into creating some of the entries for our notebook. So let's make a new entry, and I'm going to call this one Garden of Earthly Delights. And let's give it a name. I'm going to tag it with images, capital I, and painting. Okay, and then underneath it we'll do square bracket img, another single square bracket, and then all lowercase garden hyphen of earthly delights, and then close it out with 2 square brackets. Okay, so what this has done is we've created a new entry. I have a Hieronymus Bosch painting here that I'd like to use. Let's see. Yes, this is the Garden of Earthly Delights. I'm going to copy this link. This link should also appear in the lesson plan notes. So if we go, we want to load our image into this Tiddler, but how do we do that? And how do we prevent creating too much bloat in our notebook? We don't want to save images directly to the notebook. The best way I've found, the best practice, is to reference them externally. So we're going to create a new Tiddler, which is just the image itself, and I'm going to conform the name to the one that I named in here. Let's just copy Garden of Earthly Delights, and we'll use that as the title here. We don't need to tag it unless, in this example, we don't need to tag it. And we're going to create a new field name, and it's canonical underscore URI. And in the field value, we're going to paste the URL of this image. This is how we will reference. Oh, one last thing is that we want to assign the type. This is a JPEG. So we have our type, our canonical URI, and the URL here for the image itself. So if I add this, this is default behavior. It says this Tiddler shows content stored outside of the main Tiddlywiki file. You can edit the tags, fields, but cannot directly edit the content itself. This is fine, this is normal. This usually means we've successfully referenced our image. So if I click the check mark to save, here's our image, and now it's referenceable in our notebook if we use this name. Whatever name that we give it, we can now reference this image. I don't need that anymore. And since we've already referenced it here with img and then inside square brackets, Garden of Earthly Delights, let's check this, and here we are. We have a new Tiddler that's tagged images and painting, and it has a reference, an external reference to our image. Oh yes, there was one other thing I wrote down to do here, which was to create a header. And headers, if you're familiar with Markdown, it's a way of formatting text in a very simple way. We can use the GUI here to do that. So let's say Bosch. And I'll highlight that and click header 1. You can see it added a single exclamation point. And there's our header 1 and the image. So how do we get this into the table of contents? Our table of contents, if you recall, I'm going to edit it, has a list that we wanted to display, and in that list is images. So I'd like my images to display in the table of contents. So how do we do that? Well, we have this new images tag that we created. So let's click on that and click on images itself. So you'll notice that it's italicized, which means it hasn't been created yet. It means missing Tiddler images. Click Edit to create. So it's assuming that this is something you want to create, so it's sort of giving you, I don't know what you would consider this, a dummy Tiddler, something that's waiting to be created. So yes, let's create images, and let's tag it table of contents, and that's the same way we wrote it here, which is capital T, capital O, capital C, with no spaces, just table of contents, and save it. Okay, now our table of contents has updated. You can see there's an images link here with a little expandable U menu item, and we can show everything that's tagged images there. Same with the sidebar. Great. Let's add one more thing to this Tiddler, this images Tiddler that we just created. So I'm going to edit it again, and I'm going to use this macro for the list widget within Tiddlywiki, which creates a list. And let's see here. We want to paste this into the main body. So this is our macro. We're pulling the tag images and using this macro, which calls the list widget, to pull everything with this tag and list it in the body. So we'll save that. And now our image Tiddler has this painting. So now I think it's a good time to review some of what wiki text is doing in the background. So I have this big block here under the wiki text part of the notes. And I'm just going to copy and paste it in here. All right, so what are we going to title this? Let's call it wiki text. This is a custom title, but here I want to tag it recent discoveries. So what I did here was created a bunch of different examples of the ways in which wiki text is working that took me a while to wrap my head around because it wasn't always clear. But I think it's really cool. Let's see if I can expand here. So we have our header one. Wow, what just happened? That was strange. I do not know what just happened. Let's X out of that. Let's undo. So let's edit it again. Okay. We have examples of header 1, header 2, header 3, but you'll notice that even though in the body it looks like there's no line break in between them, when it's formatted, there's quite a bit of space in between the headers. So I was I discovered that in order to get, let's say, header 1, this large text, to have a forced line break, we have to add an HTML element, which is this BR encased in the brackets to force the line break. And here you can see header 1 with a line break preserving the size. So that's how we can artificially insert line breaks and not get these spaces between our formatted text. And then this is, I think this is what makes this pretty powerful. The ways to reference the hyperlinks. So, Garden of Earthly Delights, actually, I just realized that I capitalized all of it here. So I'm going to come back here, edit our original Garden of Earthly Delights painting, Tiddler, save that. Okay. So now here I have a link. If I had closed everything except this wiki text, this is a link to Garden of Earthly Delights, and it brings up our Tiddler. And all that we had to write in the body were the 2 square brackets, the name of our Tiddler, and then close it out with 2 square brackets. And it automatically knows to pull whatever Tiddler is titled this, make a linked reference to it. We can create custom links by kind of following the same format with the double square brackets, but we could give a custom name, and that's what I did here with Babycastles. This is the custom name, and then this character in between the URL and the name is the vertical pipe character, which you've seen on your keyboard perhaps. It looks like, almost looks like an I. That's a capital I. It's not an I, it's not an L, it's a pipe. We use that in programming from time to time. If you insert a pipe between your custom name and then a URL, you can create a link which will open in a new tab. In this case, this goes to Babycastles. Great. So I said this is not a link to McDonald's. So this is an idiosyncrasy of wiki text that I learned. You have to suppress links. Sometimes anything that has this kind of camel case where there's a single word with double capitals, the framework presumes it's a link to another Tiddler, that you're referencing something. But in this case, I don't want to reference anything called McDonald's. I have nothing that's called that in my notebook. So the way to suppress that behavior is by prepending a tilde to the name. So now that the tilde is there, McDonald's renders as plain text. And then a few other examples. Bold text. And this is a rocket ship. What did I do there? Okay, this is for later on. We'll use this. The bold text thing is funny. Bold text looks like, it looked like bold text was using double quotes in the markup, but it's actually using 2 single quotes. Oops. It's hard to see, but bold text, this isn't super important, but it was a gotcha for me, is using 2 single quotes next to each other to create this bold text here. And then this is similar to Markdown. We have asterisks next to these words with a space in between them, and it creates an ordered list. And then finally, this is a link to images. It's just the word images encased in double square brackets. And what that does is it takes us to the Tiddler we made for images here. Great. So recent discoveries. We wanted to add this tag to our table of contents. So we're going to do the same thing. Table of contents, here it is. Let's save it. And now recent discoveries has been added to our table of contents. Great, great. And we'll do the same thing that we did with images. I'm going to edit images and just copy this text. And for recent discoveries, we want that same macro, but we want the tag to say recent discoveries. And there's our wiki text entry up here. So now everything that's tagged recent discoveries will show up as a list in this Tiddler itself. So part of the intrigue for me about the framework was that you didn't have to worry about organizing things into folders. I think we should all stop putting things into folders and just add our entries and tag them and forget about it, because one of the marvels of this framework in particular is the way in which you can then manipulate the data later on. What's more important is making connections between your data, tagging them appropriately, and then being able to filter them however you want. And that's, I think, one of the strengths as a note-taking program. You're not pigeonholed into what a developer thinks a note-taking program should look like. You can make it look exactly how your brain works and thinks, and organize the system to be very catered to your own line of thinking. And I think that's its greatest strength. And let's see where we are here. Okay, let's get into some of those filter runs that I just mentioned. But to see it effectively working in action, let's add a few more entries. So I'm going to name this one Vanessa Nakate. She's a Ugandan youth climate activist. I want to add an image of her, and I'm also going to tag this as people. Okay, and single square bracket, img for image, single space, and then single square bracket. And now we want to create our image asset. So I'm going to say all lowercase Vanessa dash Nakate, close it out with 2 square brackets, and save it. So it's waiting for our image. So let's create the image for that. Vanessa Nakate. We're going to call it, we're going to say it's of type JPEG. The field name, add our canonical URI that we added previously. And then I have the image of her here. There she is. So let's add this to the field value. We'll click the add button and the check button to save it. There she is. So this is the image Tiddler. This is just what we're using to create the image within our notebook. And now, as you can see, it's being referenced in our actual entry for Vanessa Nakate. It's tagged image and people, so we should see it in our sidebar. We are not. And why is that? It's because it has a different tag name. This is images, but in my haste, I called this image, so it doesn't know what to do with that. So we want images. Save. And here it is in our images. Great, so that's all working. Here it is in the images Tiddler. Great, so let's add one more image. And this one, what was I going to name this? Perseverance Mars. This is also images, and I'm going to tag it Mars. We'll save that. Now let's create the image, and in the notebook I've provided some links for these exact same images I'm using. Where is that? Here it is. This is from the new Mars lander. This is a photographic landscape of the red planet. It's of type JPEG. Our canonical URI and the URL. We'll add it in there. Oh, I forgot to name it. It's important. So this is just going to be, I'll just call it Mars. That's easy. Well, actually, no, I want to call it, I already called this Mars. So technically, this is a Tiddler, so that name is already taken in the tag. So I can't call this image the same thing as the tag. So I have to be a little bit more intentional with the way that I'm tagging and naming entries into the notebook. So I'll say Mars lander for this image. This isn't super important. This is more just internal to the image. It's the way we reference it. So I don't need that anymore. And so now I want to add that image we created. So single square bracket, img, space, single square bracket, Mars dash lander, double square bracket, and there's our image. And now it should show up in our images tab here. It's in our table of contents. Great. Okay, I don't need these right now. I don't need any of the images. Let's say you accidentally closed everything and didn't know how to access, or you wanted to access something that wasn't in your table of contents. There's this recent tab over here that shows everything that was recently accessed, which can come in a lot of handy as your notebook grows and things become, before you get the organization down, it's easy to reference things this way from the recent tab. So we want to create a filter for images that are only paintings and only Mars. So yeah, let's create something called landscapes. And we don't need to tag it at the moment. This is more to demonstrate the filter run. So let's see here. This is what we want to paste into the body. Let's see if I can get this to show up here. I should have figured this out beforehand. This tiny text is bothering me. Thanks for hanging in there, everyone. So this is a new macro for a list widget where we want to pull everything that's tagged paintings and then tagged Mars. And then notice how each of these is sort of enclosed with brackets. The syntax here is important. So I'm going to copy this into the body of landscapes. So that's looking for anything that's tagged painting and Mars. But it only pulled Mars, and why is this? Paintings. I may have named Garden of Earthly Delights painting, yes. So that's why that's not showing up. Let me just correct that to painting, not paintings. And there are our two images in a new entry with a specific filter that we created. And your filters can get quite sophisticated. So I think now would be a good time to save. So I'm going to click this Save button. And you can see our empty HTML, I'm going to overwrite it here, was about a little over 2 megabytes. On the Tiddlywiki site, they say that there have been successful notebooks in the gigabyte size range, which you wouldn't expect for a single page application. But that's a very impressive amount of information. On my own site, I have about 1,000 entries, and it's about 3.6 megabytes, and still very snappy in terms of the ways in which you can search and query things. I've listed a more, let's see here. This is from the Tiddlywiki site. Let's see. This is by Tobias Beer. He lists a lot of different filter runs. Some of these I'm still wrapping my head around, but there's all kinds of ways in which you can create conditional statements and specific types of syntax specific to wiki text that create the filter runs that you want. So I included that in the notes. Let's see. Did I skip a part? Oh yes. I jumped a little bit ahead. Sorry about that. Let's create a new entry, and we'll call it not a painting. And here, this is a way of referencing. So this is the macro we want to use here. We're going to say list links, tag. I want to tag images. I'm going to delete one of these square brackets and that one as well. We're going to add an exclamation point to this tag, which negates it or cancels it out. And we want to say to painting. So this filter run will pull everything that's tagged images except for the ones that are tagged painting. So let's see what this does when we put this into our not a painting entry. Oops, I may have something happened with the quote there. There we go. So now it's just looking through everything that we have, and it's saying, okay, we have an image here. This is tagged images, and we have Perseverance Mars. This is also image. But this image, Garden of Earthly Delights, is tagged painting, so it won't get included in the list. So that's very cool. The exclamation point is kind of a way of canceling out a specific tag. Oh, someone says, Interactopia says they have over 10,000 entries. It's still working okay as a single file for now. That's impressive. It's a lot of entries. Wonderful. Yeah, I'd like to check that out, actually. Okay, so in the last 10 minutes or so, I'd like to show you some of the ways to customize the look of the notebook, which was not clear to me at the time. It took me a lot of kind of figuring out, but I hope this can help you set up some custom styles. And oh, there's one other thing that's super neat here. If I go to the settings, and I go to appearance, so it comes preloaded with all these palettes. Actually, the way to do this, I think, is in Tools, the Tools tab. And now you can see there's all these buttons that you can enable. So I'd like to enable the palette button by checking it here. And it added this button to the sidebar. Let me close that control panel. So now we have all these different ways to just dynamically change the palette of the notebook, which is pretty awesome. Let's go back to where we were. I don't remember which one was the default. We'll stay with this one for now. Maybe Desert Sand. Maybe Nord. I like Nord. Okay. It's kind of hard to see the links. I got myself into trouble here by changing the palette. All right. So I want to create a custom CSS Tiddler in order to add some custom style rules. And I need to give it a specific tag, which is, this relates to the core some of the core system elements. $:/tags /S style sheets. Tag style sheet. Add. Okay. The type is CSS. Where's our CSS? It's down here. At the bottom, static style sheet. We want to select that. And I think that's it. Hold on, this palette is bugging me. Sorry. There we go. All right, and then in the notes, I added a block of code, which is, I believe this is necessary in order for it to work. I'm not entirely sure. But this accidentally had some line breaks in here. I'm going to delete those. Okay. Basically, below this line, you can add in CSS rules, which is super cool. I'm going to show you how to change the font, and that involves loading something. Oh yeah, and then I also want to show you how to create a div container for video embeds. That's just a little bit of a cleaner way to embed videos into the site. So let's do that really quick. In my style sheet, I'm going to paste these two video container rules and create a custom class. Video container iframe. That's looking good. And then I'm going to copy this link from my friend TLR, and Space and Enemy created something called Bird Techno, which is a great video. What I want to do is go to Bird Techno, in a new window. Let's see. Here's Bird Techno. Excellent 16-minute track for your listening pleasure. And I want to get the embed code from YouTube, so I'm going to copy that. All right, close that out. And so now I'm going to paste my embed code, and above it and below it, I want to add a new div that contains my class that I just created in the custom CSS called Video Container. So you do that by, before the iframe, you add the div class equals video container, and then after the iframe, we want to close the div. So you do that by adding a slash, and then div in brackets. And we'll save this, and here is our video embed. And if you change the size of, if we go into the control panel and let's say the layout, how did we do this? Theme tweaks. Fluid story, fixed sidebar. There we go. That just expanded our story width. And now the Bird Techno embed matches our new width of the notebook. And it works well on mobile too. If you're viewing this on mobile, this is a nice way to encapsulate your divs. One last thing is the font. The font took me a while to figure out, but I shouldn't be too hard. Let's create a new Tiddler for loading this Google font. Let's see where I have this. Space Mono. I want to load this Space Mono from Google Fonts as my main font family. So I'll select the style here, and according to Google, you have to load this link into the head, which is the first region of the HTML document, but it wasn't really clear how I do that from within Tiddlywiki. And the way to do that, I'm going to copy the code for the font into the body here, but how do we get And what was this called? Space mono. But how do we get this to get referenced in the head? And the way we do that is by adding the tag $:/tags/ capital R raw capital M markup. So if I add this piece of code will get loaded into the HTML head section, which is what we want for this font. I'm going to add a dash in there. So let me save this. And now let me come back to our custom CSS. And let's make a new rule for the site title and the entry headers. So I'm pasting in, this is all in the notebook. This is at the very bottom for space mono. We want to add basically a font family declaration, font style, font weight, and then the TC site title is the CSS name for this over here where it says My Notebook in the sidebar, and the header 2 TC titles are all of our titles in each individual entry or tiddler. So let me save that. And you can see it dynamically updated the font. So we have a new font for all of our entries. And that wasn't so clear cut, so I hope that offers some of you a shortcut for expanding the look and feel of the notebook. We didn't create our about page yet, but let's tag it table of contents. Let's say hello world, and now it's been added to our sidebar because it's tagged table of contents, and our table of contents, if we go back to it and edit it, is looking for that about Tiddler to be the first in the list. We could decide, oh, we don't want it to be first, we want it to be at the end, so I'll put it to the end here, save that. And now you can see it jumped to the bottom here. So that's how you can arrange and organize your information in the sidebar. And we did have, I don't think we'll have time, but we did have one more entry, which was for text in our table of contents. If I add this, there's our last category in the table of contents. And as you can see, because it has there's nothing tagged text, it doesn't have this drop-down menu that has our entries for that tag. And so in our settings, if we go back to info, the default tiddlers here, we can tell it when it first loads what we want it to display. And I'll decide here, let's just put images there. I think if we wanted to add recent discoveries as well, we would have to encase it in double square brackets. And that's because anything that has a space in the name needs to be encapsulated as a single Tiddler reference. So it needs the double square brackets, whereas images does not. So if I save this, let me click this check to save my page. Let me save it and overwrite our empty.html. And if I open, or if I let's see, let me try refreshing the page. There it is. So it loaded with images and recent discoveries on the hard refresh that I just executed. We've still got our custom font. We still have our palette button over here in our settings. And I believe we've reached the end of the workshop, but I'm happy to keep going if other people have questions. I think I covered everything in the lesson here. Sorry if I was going a little too fast, or if some things weren't as clear because of the text size. There's one thing I should say about saving, which is a gotcha. Do not go to the File menu and do File Save Page As. That will not work. You will lose all of your data. Only use the Save button here. Do not use File Save As. For whatever reason, that doesn't perform the same function. So one other thing, which is a gotcha that I discovered, is that if I was searching in here, let's say I'm searching for Mars, and I've got everything that comes up as Mars. So I clicked on this Mars lander image, and it came up. And you can see I've still got the Mars text in my search field. And what happens when I save the page now? I'm going to resave the page, replace, and now I'm going to refresh the page. Oh, you know what? It didn't do it. I thought it was going to keep Mars, that it was going to keep that there in the field. Maybe it had something to do with whichever tab was open. So if I had if my recent tab was loaded and I saved the page, let me do the save again. Save, replace, and let me refresh. Yeah, so it remembers which tab you're in whenever your last save was. So for my own website, I don't want people, when they go to the URL, to load up my recent tab. So I have to make sure that I have the tab I want to load selected and then save. Wonderful. Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to add, or if they're wondering about... oh, I should say that my site is used completely in the Tiddlywiki framework, and everything is editable. So if you're curious about how I did certain things, you can go to https. Why is it doing that? You can go to this website and edit any of these entries to kind of see how the filter runs are working, or how I created, in my case, I added to my table of contents some images and buttons and other links, so including the actual wiki text stuff. There's some extra stuff, and it's just links for images and other stuff like email addresses. So have a go at that if you're curious. I did learn a lot making this site. It was one of the inspirations for wanting to give this workshop with Babycastles. And finally, I'd like to thank my friend Lee Tussman at Babycastles, who reached out and said, this is looking really cool, because I had been posting about it. And I'm happy to share and hopefully kickstart or offer some shortcuts to how you can style your own nonlinear notebook and digital garden. Oh, tags versus upper and lower case. That's entirely up to you, but I would nail down a system early on, because it gets really annoying to go back and change things. But everything is case sensitive. So let me give you an example of that. I have, in my bookcase, I have author names. These are the books I've been reading. So if I go to a book I've read, I tag the author name as it should be written naturally. I started out doing all lowercase, but I realized that was going to get me into trouble, so then I started doing uppercase for some things, lowercase for other things. And I think it's all a matter of your personal preference, which is kind of what's really cool about the framework. yeah, it's super customizable, and the way that you tag should work for you. It shouldn't be because it's you should do it this way or that way. It's just any kind of personal preference that's systematic that works for you that you can always refer to, and the goal is to never lose track of your information or your notes. So decide on a naming system, decide on a tagging system, be systematic with it. Keep in mind it is case sensitive, so you'll have, I could have this same tag, this author name, Andrew R. Gallimore. If I created that same word but with no capitalized letters, it would be a different tag. It wouldn't be the same tag. So yeah, keep that in mind. The CSS Grid might be, you may be able to do something with Grid, although my experience with that is limited, and I think it would disrupt some of the core framework files. You'd have to alter core framework files, and that might get you into trouble when they push updates to the framework, because then you would have to keep track of everything that you changed to perform that update and not lose changes. But I'm sure there would be a way to do CSS Grid rules for some things. There's one other aspect visually while we're talking about CSS that I really enjoyed playing with, which was, where is this? Story view. So if I let me do that again. If I go to my settings, if I go to the appearance tab and then story view, they offer these 3 views, and then there are a variety of plugins that users have been contributing. Very rich plugin ecosystem for Tiddlywiki, which is it's a deep dive, it really is. But it comes preloaded with these different story views, and the story view, I'm going to change it to zoom in. Zoom in is cool because it only shows you one Tiddler at a time. So if I go over here to images, you can see that the control panel zoomed away and now it's just images. And I go to Garden of Earthly Delights and it kind of zooms in, and all I see is this one entry with that zoom in feature. The other one is pop. What does pop do? I guess it's just a different animation of the way that it pops in. Perseverance Mars, yeah. Oh, I see. I think it's like wedging itself in between the entries that you have open. So I just leave mine on classic, which I think adds it to, it'll add it to the bottom. So I have these open right now. Let me close these. So if I click on Garden of Earthly Delights, yeah, it just adds it to the bottom of the stack. So that's something that's really interesting. And you can create custom palettes by duplicating one of the existing palettes, and then when you, how do I do that? Yes, so there's a neuroscientist I've been really enjoying her work lately, Anne-Laure Lepunf. She discusses Rome in relation to Tiddlywiki and says that they're really similar. Rome, I think, is a paid research application, but you're able to accomplish the same nonlinear organization and robustness as Rome in TW, as far as I can tell. I haven't used Rome, so I can't really speak to that, but there has been a lot of comparisons online that I've seen regarding Rome and Tiddlywiki. It's actually in my notes for the lesson plan under Digital Gardens, but let me copy this link. This is, I think that's, yes, this is, This is her Twitter profile. Here you can get to Ness Labs, which is a community that's very actively talking about Rome and Tiddlywiki and non-linear thinking, networked thinking. This is very cool. I highly recommend, if you're interested in this kind of way of organizing information, check out that community. And Laura in particular, she has a new YouTube channel where she discusses a lot of these topics. I know this isn't our images. Tiddler is looking a little bit sad, but I hope you get the idea of the ways in which you can filter this information. So yeah, there's no need for public hosting. In my case, I'm hosting on a server, so all I had to do to get it to load is I put it in the root, and instead of empty.html, I renamed it to what browsers like to see in your root, which is index.html, but it's the exact same file. This doesn't affect the functionality, and it's very easy to transport via thumb drive, via Dropbox, however you like to share information. It's really handy having everything encapsulated in a single file. So I'm very excited about the possibilities of future proofing and continuing to add notes. For all these books that I've read, I have various reading notes, and now I feel very excited about having a place to actually preserve notes based off of things that I've read. Like I said earlier, I wish I knew about this 10 years ago. I'd have such a lit bookcase full of notes. But yeah, start now. Start filtering and feeding it your info, taking notes with it. It's really quite exciting. Yes, start now. Don't wait. They're not exactly regrets, but I only discovered Tiddlywiki recently, so had I known about this earlier, I would have been much more dedicated to using it. And the fact that it can work, for decades to come should be promising, because I'm sure some of you have built sites that have broken and you've had to update, and we don't want to be doing that. Oh, cool. Yeah, I'll have to check out that Jeremy Rustin interview talking about Rome. Rome seems very interesting. I just haven't used it myself, so I can't really speak on Rome. Yeah, Google is changing so often that I don't trust it anymore, and they have a bad reputation for canceling outright entire project wings and products. So I definitely recommend retaining ownership of your notes, your information, by keeping a notebook of this kind active, updated, and learning a little bit about. There's so much functionality I didn't cover today. If you go to Tools, or no, More, and you look at the system, and you just have if you take a look at everything that's going on in the framework, it's a little overwhelming. There's a lot going on here. So the possibilities are kind of endless. But I think you don't really need to know how it's all working to start using it effectively. In my case, I just kind of went for it, learned a few things along the way, and then happy to share what I know here today. Formula, what kind of plugin is that? Maybe it's like latex or something. Yes, 100 Rabbits is very up on the future-proofing tip. I highly recommend everyone check out 100 Rabbits. Big inspiration, major props. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I think feel free to reach out to me directly via email or however. I want to thank Babycastles for this opportunity to share some knowledge with all y'all, and let's hold on to our information ourselves. Let's not give it to Google or any other large entity, and create notebooks that work for us, that work the way that our minds work, because everyone has a particular way of thinking, and I think that you can exploit that to your benefit with something like Tiddlywiki. So yeah, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you check out the upcoming Babycastles workshops. They look really good. And do stay in touch and have a great week. Thanks, everyone.